Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to National Library Week. Just want to give you a couple of heads up. So tomorrow we have World Wealth on the High Plains by Bob Willen. You can read that. And so if you want to buy a book or a money, we'll sign it. He's a great historian. He's from Northwest Kansas, and Judy recommended me, and you know what a great historian she is. So he will be here tomorrow. And then on Thursday, we have Mr. Roosevelt by Marilyn Holt, and she will bring books to also sell if you want to, but sometimes people want to get these gifts. A couple other things. Murder mystery, there are a few murder mystery tickets left. It is this Saturday. It starts at 6:30, and the tickets are $25. The other thing that I didn't make a poster for is that the Friends annual Friends meeting is at 6 o'clock before the murder mystery. And so they'll go over what they did for that this last year. For the light. Okay, that's at 6 o'clock, and that's free. You don't have to have a ticket for the annual meeting. You do have to have a ticket to go to the murder mystery. And this is put on by the Friends, and it's also been sponsored by the Family Center for Health Care. So that's really cool. Coming up soon, the Kansas Parks, State Parks, is giving us the ability to fill out forms for you when you want to go to a specific park in Kansas. So if you go somewhere, do not plan on paying. Come to the library. We'll fill out a form for you. We'll put the dates if you want to be there, and then you get in free. I don't have the forms yet. I just know it's coming in April. But that's for families. It's for anyone from 0 to elderly. So do not pay for a park visit this year. Okay. They want people to be in the parks. So they're recognizing that libraries are a valuable place where many people will come and be able to access the park passage. Okay. And then I think that's about it right now. Yep. One other announcement that I want to make, and I'm going to go off the camera for just a second. Excuse me. There we go. So the cupcakes that you had were in honor of Nancy Sadler. You remember the little plastic thingy box says the next chapter. We printed that in our little 3D sketches. They're books, and they say next chapter. We printed those right here in honor of Nancy because she is retiring as a. She's always saying that. April 20th, 2022, she will have worked at the library off and on, and full time for 31 years. It's been a real good, wonderful employee, but also has a heart for libraries, knows how to do things, studied library. I mean, she didn't take the library science courses, but there was a course for leadership at one point, and she did all of that. And she's just been wonderful. Alicia upstairs is at the main desk. She's been training in Nancy's office, and so she'll be taking over Nancy's duties as interlibrary loan and buying things and things like that. And then Katie, who works in the evenings on weekends, is going to take Alicia's place. So we kind of planned the transition. We just didn't know what was going to happen, when it was going to happen. She had to get all of the ducks in a row. So yeah, we're going to miss Nancy a lot, and we want you to come on April 20th. We have a come and go reception from 2 to 5, and we'll just have some light refreshments and coffee, want to bring a card or something. We'll have a card basket out if you want to bring a gift. I know she'll take it. You know, just to honor her and her legacy here, and her parents' legacy. They were board members years ago, and that's not why she's working here, because she's an avid reader, and I'm going to have to say, read this book and tell me what you think. so anyway, just to let you know about that. And now let me get Marla Matkin to come and tell us about being a woman on the prairie. Okay. I'm going to turn all this off, and she's going to come and start speaking.
The moment I saw the brilliant proud morning sunshine high over the deserts of Santa Fe, something stood still in my soul. D.H. Lawrence. The Santa Fe Trail began with William Becknell's expedition of 1821 and would be active until the coming of the railroad in 1880, when it was no longer necessary to travel by wagon. In 1829, we find the first record of a woman traveling the Santa Fe Trail. In fact, it was 6 women and 10 men who had been exiled by the government of Mexico in retaliation against Spain. They would join an American caravan journeying up the trail to Missouri, where they disappeared nameless into history, except for one of the men, who would later reappear and return with the Army of the West to Santa Fe as the newly appointed American consul. Now, the hope and object of this program is not only to introduce you and familiarize you with women along the Santa Fe Trail, but how they traveled, how they lived on and along the Santa Fe Trail. And there's one very significant point that I want you to all leave remembering. And that is, these women were not, and I repeat, were not silent bystanders on the trail. They were very active participants. They helped write the history and tell the story of the Santa Fe Trail. And as we know, sometimes women's stories are overlooked or underestimated. And we want to make sure that these women, along with others, are remembered. Because scattered throughout this presentation are 3 short but insightful and informative first-person portrayals of some of the more well-noted women along the Santa Fe Trail. And to put their lives and experiences in context, I'm going to provide you with a bit of history. So with that being said, spanning 1,200 miles, the Santa Fe Trail was a commercial, military, and sometimes immigrant trail. And that is in opposition to the Oregon, California, and Mormon trails that were primarily immigrant trails. As a commercial trail, it transported textiles and hardware to Santa Fe. Why these items? These are the items they needed and could obtain nowhere else. And there's something important to be remembered about the trail itself. It was an international trade route. It wasn't just a regional trade route. It was an international trade route. And because of that, it was more profitable, more diverse, and more colorful. It was also a highway over which stagecoach lines traveled, making it a very active and busy trail. Now, in some instances, the traders and freighters would trade for silver, mules, and furs and return with those, while others chose to sell off their livestock and wagons and make a speedy return trip. Now, as a rule, these traders and freighters could make 2 8-week trips to Santa Fe a season or a year. And on a very good year, if the weather, among other things, cooperated, they could possibly make 3. They were encouraged to travel in groups. Some of these trains were as large as 100, 125 wagons. And on occasion, they traveled alongside a military caravan. And you know the old saying, there is safety in numbers. And you're going to want that, because if misfortune befalls you on the trail, you want as many people, as much knowledge, skills, tools, and resources at your aid to get you through whatever mishap might befall you. Now, 2/3 of the Santa Fe Trail goes through and passes through Kansas. The other portions pass through Missouri, Oklahoma, Colorado, and New Mexico. A 63-mile stretch of the trail in southwest Kansas became known as the Coronado, which means long journey. This stretch of Great Plains between the Arkansas River and the Cimarron Springs was without a water course or a pool. There wasn't a shrub, there wasn't a tree. And during this stretch of land, oftentimes there were conjured up mirages that tempted your eye and your senses, but soon disappeared the closer you got. It was considered by many to be the most hazardous, unpleasant, and terrible part of the journey. So many people felt that if you got through it unscathed, you would probably breathe a sigh of relief. Now, here are some little side notes. Depending on the year you decide to travel the trail, will indicate your departure point. If you're headed down the trail in 1821, you're probably leaving from Franklin, Missouri, making it a 1,200-mile trip. By 1832, your terminus will be Independence, Missouri. And by 1845, you will likely be waving goodbye from Kansas City, making it an 800-mile trip. So you've shaved off 400 miles off your journey. But just like travelers today, not everybody followed the device. So they were leaving from these points that are between, or possibly up around Fort Leavenworth. Now, I mentioned it was a military trade route. Why was it necessary to have a military presence on the Santa Fe Trail? Well, there were the border disputes of the 1840s. There were disputes between the Indians and the traders. And there was the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 48, where the United States would claim possession of the Southwest. And many people feel that's why it was fought in the first place, is we wanted that land. And then there was the Civil War. So you do have a strong military presence on the trail. As I mentioned earlier, it was an international trail, making it a cultural mosaic. You could find gold seekers, adventurers, mountain men, hunters, reporters, traders, trappers, guides, translators, invalids. You could find almost anybody and everybody on the Santa Fe Trail, making it a very interesting journey on occasion. And I would like now to introduce you to one of those interesting people, and that is one of our ladies, Susan Shelby McGoffin. Born to wealth and privilege, she was an unlikely person to be traveling the Santa Fe Trail. But in point of fact, this bride of 8 months would be the first white woman to ever travel this trade route. And much of the information we have regarding the trail and travel on the trail is supplied to us in her diary. She began her diary on June of 1846 as she left Independence, Missouri. She wrote in it almost every day and chronicled in great detail the appearances and customs of everything she saw and experienced. She traveled with her husband Samuel, her maid Jane, her dog Ring, and she was often most comfortable setting up housekeeping in a tent with bed, mattress, table, chairs, and carpeting. On the trail for 15 months, she would become proficient in Spanish, but more important, proficient in trader lingo. So let us join Susan along the trail. Now my prairie life begins. And with my dear husband Samuel, who I refer to as Miama, I embraced this pioneering experience. My journey tells a story different from what has ever been done before. The curtain now raises on a new scene, my personal trek from the streets of New York to the plains of New Mexico. As I ride along, I can scarcely wrap my mind around it. Upon entering this prairie world, I observed migrating buffalo. We supped on soup made of the hump ribs of the buffalo, the choicest meat. I have never tasted its equal in the best hotels of New York and Philadelphia. Unfortunately, these animals are quite ugly, ill-shapen things with long, shaggy hair over their heads. But they are the supreme rulers of their prairie kingdom. I would now like to share with you an entry from my diary. On July 4th, 1846, I took the opportunity to cut my name among the hundreds of others on Pawnee Rock. It is near this very location we suffered a horrendous carriage accident. What a mess of baskets, boxes, and bags. But we picked up and traveled on, though both my husband and I were battered and bruised, to say the least. At last, we reached Ben's Fort. The buildings of the fort are constructed of adobe, with dirt floors which we must dampen with water several times a day, and ceilings made of logs. Upon entering the fort, we become part of a very interesting and diverse culture. Unfortunately, it was during my stay here that I suffered a miscarriage. And to think in a few short months I should have been a happy mother and made the heart of a father glad. In the room directly below me, an Indian woman gave birth to a healthy baby. Within minutes, she went to the river and bathed herself and the child. It is a ritual of her people, I am told. But time and trail wait for no one. Our next destination, Las Vegas, New Mexico, where I am shocked to see children in a perfect state of nudity and scantily clad women wearing skirts showing their calves and low-cut blouses. All this aside, they are a very quick and intelligent people. Again, from my diary, I read, we traveled in the wake of the army under General Kearney. On August 31st, 1846, under the Star-Spangled Banner, I entered Santa Fe. The first American lady under such circumstances, I was told. It was hard to realize that I was in my own house where I was to receive callers and set up housekeeping. The military had been very punctual in calling, some nearly every day. One even arrived with an invitation to a Spanish ball given by the officers to the traders. I felt it impolite not to exhibit myself at the menagerie, along with the other bipeds of curiosity. I observed Doña Tulis, principal Monte Bank-keeper of Santa Fe. I hope you too have an opportunity to catch a glimpse of her. Unable to see me in person, General Kearney sent his regards by the way of the Alma as we prepared to depart Santa Fe. If possible, I prefer to ride horseback, and if the opportunity presents it, I happily tramp the country and train over which we travel, whether it be high-low, despite the dangers. Again, from my diary, I read, Wednesday, November 24th, 1846 is the most memorable day, as it is the anniversary of our wedding. It will be fresh in the minds of those most concerned. I was relieved to have cause for celebration, as I have been ill with fever while at San Gabriel. After great prostration of body, I was again creeping about. December 29, 1846, finds the enemy, the Mexican army, on us as we hear today, as they have even had battle with our troops only about 80 miles from us. It was quite a nice little skirmish. Later in January, rumors came that the population of New Mexico was rising up before us. But in truth, we were flying before them as we passed through the Coronado de Muerto. I deal with an ever-present fear for myself and Meowma. We take refuge in a boarding house, and the inmates there are exceedingly kind. We have chocolate at breakfast, again about 10, with dinner at 2, chocolate again at 4, and with supper at 9. I shall have to make a cookbook to take home with me, as the cooking here is entirely different from ours, but the dishes are quite fine. 'Twould be a shame not to let my friends taste them too. But we are given a nice diversion from the trials and woes. The wonder of wonders, the American lion himself has called on me today, old rough and ready General Zachary Taylor. He was very talkative, agreeable, and quite polite, with an apparent high regard for female character, as he should, since he fathers 4 daughters. He even wore his uniform, which I am told is no common custom with him. The world is full of fears and woes that God puts us all through, but we dare not murmur, even though they be hard. It is the life of a wandering princess, this one of mine, and I have accepted it as my lot. I have shared with you a brief but telling account of our 1,200-mile crossing, but do not be fooled by its brevity. For in the pages of my diary lies the mystery of mysteries, the Santa Fe Trail. Thank you. Now, let's say you decided to become a trail traveler. Well, what can you expect? Let's take a little bit and look at your schedule for the day. Most everybody's going to rise about 9. The trail hands are going to hitch up the livestock to the wagons. You're going to load up. You're going to move out and head down the trail. You're going to ride along until about mid-morning when all will come to a stop. You'll unhitch the animals, allowing them to graze. You'll gather either wood or buffalo chips for the fire, and you will prepare and eat your main meal of the day. Now, Mary Sloan Russell, who you'll meet in a little bit, was a child of 7 when she first traveled the trail, and one of her chores was to gather buffalo chips for the campfire. But she said you had to be very careful, not because they might be green, but you step back and kick them first, because underneath might reside big hairy spiders, centipedes, and possibly a scorpion. When you were sure they had been vacated, you would carefully put them up and gather them up in your big voluminous skirts and take them back to the campsite. Now, what are your rations going to be like for the day? Well, you're going to get a pound of flour, a pound of sow belly bacon, an ounce of coffee, 2 ounces sugar, and a dash of salt. Not exactly gourmet eating. But along the way, maybe you will be treated with beans or apples or some wild game buffalo, for instance. Now, it's during this stop that the men are going to make any necessary wagon repairs. They're going to doctor the horses, and they will hunt if the opportunity presents itself. And then shortly before noon, you're going to gather up all your bits and pieces, because you're going to move out around noon or shortly there after, along the trail. So it is going to be quite the interesting morning and experience. Then at the day's end, when you make a stop, you're going to again take care of the animals and wagons, because that's your means of transportation. And you're going to choose night guards, and hopefully one and all will enjoy a few hours of leisure and a good night's sleep. Now, Marion Sloan Russell says as a child, she and her older brother would go exploring, and they found out that the big hairy tarantula lived in a big hole in the ground. So they came up with their own little game, and so they would stomp around chanting, "Tarantula, tarantula, come out, tell us what it's all about." And after a while of doing this, then here would come these big hairy spiders on their long stilt-like legs to entertain the kids. So both kids and adults alike received lessons on the trail. They would receive nowhere else, not even a classroom. And she also said they liked to play in no man's land. And that was a strip of land between the military camp and the trader and freighter camp. And they would play ball games, leapfrog, and dare base. Now, you got an idea of your schedule, what you're going to eat, or what's the experience really going to be like. Well, as a rule, what you're going to experience is a lot of tedium and boredom. You aren't necessarily always going to be in constant danger. You can be, and you prepare as best you can, but after all, it's unknown and unexpected. But as a rule, you're going to be riding along, observing the buffalo and the elk and the pronghorn and prairie dogs. But what's really going to test your mettle is the mosquitoes, gnats, and storms. And I dare say if you were to travel the trail today or have any other outdoor experience, what's going to drive you over the edge? Mosquitoes, gnats, and storms. So 200 years later, some things have never changed. But let's say misfortune does befall you. What form might it take? Well, there's disease, illness, accident, extreme heat, storms, Indians, thievery, fire, and lack of food and water, for the most part. Now, what kind of diseases are you going to face? You know, we faced some of our own in the last couple of years. What these people faced as a rule was cholera, influenza, malaria, and possibly typhoid fever. Now, some of you may or may not know that cholera is a waterborne illness. And once you contract the cholera, few people ever survived, and it was a horrible death, and there was no cure. But all you had to do, and when they found out, was boil your water. Then you have influenza. This is usually treated with home remedies, herbs. Then you have malaria. Now, by this time, they realize quinine will be a treatment for malaria. You just have to make sure you have brought some with you. And then you have to be careful about your fellow trail travelers, because they may have brought with them measles or tuberculosis, or what they referred to in the day as consumption. So if you ever read in a Western novel or see on a movie screen or on an old wooden grave marker, they died of consumption, they died of tuberculosis. Okay, what kind of accidents are you going to experience? Well, there'll be gun accidents. Everybody had to bring a gun along with them for protection. But these people were greenhorns. They didn't know how to handle guns, at least initially. So they'd fall over and trip on them, knock them over, accidentally shoot themselves or somebody else. And the old phrase we still use today, I didn't know it was loaded. And even some of the military soldiers, the young men, they weren't very accomplished initially with guns, and they had the same fate. Then you have wagon accidents. You could lose a wheel, break an axle. The team could run away with the wagon. Or you and the wagon could go ass over appetite or in rough terrain that you weren't expecting, doing damage to both of you. But what's going to claim more lives on the trail than anything else is river crossings. How many of you watched the show 1883? Many of you watched 1883. Okay, do you remember the episode where they crossed the Brazos River and how treacherous it was? It was every bit that hard or worse. But what are you going to do? You're not going to go any further unless you get across this river. And back then they weren't dammed up, they weren't siphoned off. And if you'd had a good torrential rain, they were running over the bank. And it didn't matter whether you were traveling the Santa Fe Trail, the Oregon, California, or Mormon Trail. It was river crossings that had the biggest potential of claiming your life. So be careful on the trail. Now, let's go from the more treacherous to a little bit of the spicy on the trail as I introduce you to our next lady, Doña Tulis. Fruit and young girls ripened early in the sultry valley of central Sonoma. It was here that Gratuitous Burchello, New Mexico's celebrated gambler of the 1830s and 40s, was born around 1800. But she achieved fame known as La Tulis, possibly designating her curvaceous figure, as Tulis means slender reed. She said men gambled to entertain themselves. After all, it was a national pastime. Her game was Monte, and she said you could only learn the mysteries of Monte by losing at it. Early on, she, among others, realized that she had an extraordinary ability, the perception of and power over the male psyche. What do you think, ladies? Would you like to have a perception of and power over the male psyche? And it served her well. This unique talent was likely the result of a student and native intelligence. And this is how she achieved her wealth and fame. Early on, she weighed her options: home and family, or wealth and fame. And what do you think she chose? So let's learn the tricks of the trade from Santa Fe's most famous courtesan and gambler, Doña Tulis. He is a fool who thinks by force of skill to turn the current, much less a woman's will. As a fierce and independent businesswoman, I have amassed wealth and fame, the envy of many. Some have even gone so far as to regale me as a very fascinating woman. While I am flattered, I assure you my sizable acquisitions have been accumulated by my own labor and exertion. But if you ever find yourself in Santa Fe, I welcome you to my home and business on Burro Alley between San Francisco Avenue and Plaza Avenue. I promise you, you won't be disappointed. The floors are covered with the finest European carpets of my choosing. Etched mirrors illuminate your surroundings. Crystal chandeliers, rich drapes, and imported furniture have been brought down the trail by wagon. I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome you to my saloon gambling house. Why, you might even find yourself rubbing elbows with the governor or possibly a priest. I guarantee it to be a festive atmosphere. Now, you may well ask, by what goals did I achieve these lofty designs? After all, it was a conventional start. At the age of 23, I married the prominent Manuel Cisneros. Inspired to maintain my independence, I retained my dowry, my personal property, and my maiden name. As these, as you well know, are no small accomplishments. Unfortunately, our marriage was visited by sadness when 2 sons born to us died in infancy. But I would not be discouraged and made up for this loss by adopting daughters, which I married off to Americans. It gradually helped me build bridges through these marriages with U.S. traders. I make no excuse for the fact that I have an eye for the art of the deal. Not only have I wealth and fame in the saloon and gambling business, but when I became aware of profits to be made in the gold and mule trade, I didn't hesitate. And I broadened my interest still further to include investments on the Chihuahua and Santa Fe Trail. But I achieved most of my fame as a gambler. Madame Latuli's, Queen of Sin. My game was Monte, named after the mountain of cards left behind after a certain amount had been dealt, and played with the traditional old Spanish deck of 40 cards, which I did with skillful precision as though they slipped through my fingers as I was handling knitting needles. It is even claimed I had the ability to read the body language and facial expressions of my often sweating and sometimes fidgety opponents. I never reveal my secrets or emotions. That is how I maintain superiority over the game. A brash Kentucky trader once taunted me until he left the table broke, at which point he danced a tipsy jig yelling, "Wake up, snakes, hail, Columbia, I'm off to California in the morning. And I say to you, fancy lady, I'll see you in the fall." I commanded the situation as I always do, and with a curtsy, I disappeared into the dawn. At the start of the Mexican-American War in 1846, American soldiers soon arrived. I welcomed them as friends and customers. My newfound friends, albeit Rangers in the U.S. Army, found themselves in need of money. Having been told I dealt in large sums of money, not to mention enemy secrets and information, my help and generosity was quickly sought. A gilt-edged invitation arrived. At the appointed time, Colonel Mitchell, a most handsome officer in full dress uniform, stood at my door. And I, in silk and fine jewels, was escorted to the play Pasario in the Palace of the Governors. After a delightful evening and the promise of a generous loan, I was returned to my door late that night. And might I add, a good evening, such as the angels might smile down upon, was exchanged between us. My loan to Mitchell enabled him to send forth into battle his elite Chihuahua Rangers. But a war correspondent foolishly attempted to send an account of our evening together to his St. Louis newspaper. But that was before Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell threatened the shooting if he succeeded. Never underestimate a well-stated threat or a loaded pistol. At the conclusion of the conflict, New Mexico became a United States territory. And I became a United States citizen. Love, Monty, and intrigue have ruled much of my life, but as I once read, everyone is as God made them, many a great deal worse. But love, money, and intrigue have ruled my life. And so I welcome fame. But, oh, beware of the martyrdom of fame. Leaving you with this final thought, I bid you one and all, adios, my friends. And may we meet again somewhere along the trail. I, for one, look forward to it. Now, unfortunately, time does not permit introducing you to all the ladies on the trail, but there are a few I would like to give you a brief bio, and hopefully I will interest you or intrigue you enough that you will want to read more, and as you are in a library, this is the perfect place. There's Mary Donahoe. This intrepid and extraordinary woman put her energy and commanding spirit to good use when she accompanied her husband, William, to Santa Fe. where they operated the hotel on the plaza before returning back up the trail to Missouri 5 years later. Charlotte Green, you would have met her at Ben's Fort. Charlotte, a woman of color, along with her husband Dick and brother Andrew, were house slaves of the Bent brothers. She had an infectious laugh and was known up and down the Rockies for her cooking and entertaining one and all with her fandango dancing. Julia Archibald Holmes. In 1859, Julia accompanied her husband, James, to Santa Fe, where he was the newly appointed Secretary of the Territory. And she would be a correspondent for the New York Herald Tribune. In an effort to highlight the suffrage movement, she wrote and had published an account of her walk along the Santa Fe Trail and her earlier climb up Pikes Peak in a bloomer outfit. Sister Blandina Segal, she was transferred to New Mexico, where she worked tirelessly in behalf of the poor, the sick, as well as immigrants. And she became a very vocal advocate for Hispanics and Indians losing their land to swindlers. Eliza St. Clair Sloan. This nomadic wanderer had always had an adventure for a new trail. The mother of Marion Sloan Russell. She was known as a cook and innkeeper. In fact, she cooked for a time at Fort Hays. She instilled in her children a wanderlust, courage, and sense of wonder. And after all, what more can you ask for? Walking Woman. Born of a French-Canadian trapper and snake woman in Arapaho, she would become one of the first in a generation of children to straddle two cultures. And she would become one of the first to receive a Euro-American education. Later, she would marry Thomas Fitzpatrick, and they would settle in Westport and be active on the Santa Fe Trail until his death. And now I come to my most favorite woman of all, and that is Marion Sloan Russell. Marion Sloan Russell's memoirs, Land of Enchantment, is ranked by many, including myself, as one of the finest in telling the human side of travel and life along the Santa Fe Trail. Her reminiscences have a lyrical quality that become a song in prose. They are a tribute to a bygone era, as stated by Mark Simmons, noted historian. Known as Little Maid Marian, to traders and soldiers, she would make 5 trips over the Santa Fe Trail before finally settling down to spend her adult life along its deeply rutted landscape. Within view of these broad, deep ruts, Marion Sloan Russell would die in 1936 in Trinidad, Colorado, at the age of 92. And after everything she had been through, she was struck down and killed by modern conveyance, the automobile. So it is my great pleasure to conclude my program with this most enchanting of storytellers, Marion Sloan Russell. My beloved New Mexico, this land of enchantment where gods walked in the cool of the evening. Its hypnotic spell has been woven in a rich pattern through the tapestry of my life. But every journey begins with a single step. or in my case, at the age of 7, I, along with my resourceful mother, Eliza, and my older brother, Will, climbed to the spring seat of a wagon bound for Santa Fe. The caravan was led by Captain Xavier Aubrey. This energetic man with piercing eyes was an ardent admirer of my mother and made sure we felt secure and well provided for. You see, I never knew my father, William Sloan, an Army surgeon in the Mexican-American War. But my mother would marry again, this time a man by the name of Jeremiah Mahoney to be exact. But he died when I was 5. And by 1852, we were but a family of 3, headed for Santa Fe on the Will-o'-the-Wisp Trail of the same name. And I can only describe it as a magical experience, where I would encounter places much like a Persian rug, woven with lavender, red and yellow wildflowers, mingling with silvery green prairie grass. And the stories told of the mysteries to be found along the Santa Fe Trail were sure to ignite our young imaginations. While sitting at our campfire one night, Captain Aubrey told us of the New Mexico Territory, where only the brave or the criminal come. He referred to it as a land without law, but the air makes the heart to beat high and the blood to be red and the eyes to look forward. Folks come to live and they get what they come for. Constructed hardly a year before our arrival, Fort Union was laid out before us against a snowy background. Uncle Sam was trying hard to protect his traveling public. After the mules were rested, we struck out for Santa Fe. Our sights originally set on California. We were forced to settle first in Albuquerque when my mother's work basket with our money and family jewels was stolen. Tears rolled down her porcelain face when the jewels we were able to recover had to be sold in order to rent an adobe house, where she opened Sloan's boarding house. Most of her boarders were Indian scouts. Outfitted with begged and borrowed furniture, we were now in business, and California was but a dream. But then one night intruders besieged our little sanctuary, and my mother thought it best we go back to Santa Fe, where we set up housekeeping, taking in military boarders at the princely rate of $45 a month. Then came the evening, as I wound my way home from the academy where I attended school, that a man met me. I exchanged a few simple shy words with him. But later, I would be prouder of my acquaintance with this man than any other, for he was Colonel Kit Carson. Great men such as Carson refused to falter, regardless their frailties. And in the end, Colonel Carson would be my very dear lifelong friend. And I would always be his little maid, Marion. Alas, we returned to Missouri when my mother learned her house there was standing unrented. We left not realizing how homesick we would be for New Mexico before we would return. In the spring of 1860, my mother pushed her chair back from the table after hearing Will and I pining for New Mexico. Keep still. I'm as homesick as you are. We're going west again. Fort Union had grown in our absence, but we slipped back into the life easily. One happy year passed in Santa Fe before my mother's nomadic nature again took hold, and we headed eastward. But who am I to complain? I would rather embark on a prairie schooner for parts unknown than to embark on white wings for a place in the skies called heaven. But it was back in Kansas City that a young man gave me a diamond ring. I like the feel of it on my finger. Then one day my mother said, you know, I think after the wedding, I should go west again. Go west without me? Such nonsense. I gave the ring back. The lure of the trail was just too strong. It was in the year 1864 that I first met Lieutenant Richard B. Russell. I was rounding the corner rather suddenly, my green veil streaming behind me, the wind blowing the hair on my eyes, and I was struggling hard to keep my long skirts where they belong. And there he stood before me. That was the moment the whole world stood still. My tall young lieutenant stood and smiled at me while I struggled with my skirts and my hair and my veil. Then on he marched with his company, taking my foolish young heart right along with him. They say love is like measles, you take it only once. Cupid wastes no second arrow on our hearts. And I'm sure that is true in my case. For from that first day, on August day, on the streets of Old Fort Union, to that other August day, 23 years later, when an assassin's bullet took him from me, my heart and love never faltered. In fact, that love is a living part of the soul of me today, even though the grass has waved over my lieutenant all these many years. After Richard mustered out of the Army, we, along with a partner, invested in a trading post in Tucalodi, New Mexico. The partnership failed, and despite our exhaustive efforts, we were forced to sell out. And I would find myself leaving my beloved New Mexico. Near Trinidad, Colorado, we operated the Stonewall Valley Ranch. We would be blessed with 9 children, 6 of whom are still alive. Time passed, the children grew, and we had a full and rich life until Richard's untimely death in the Maxwell land grant steal. All these many years later, my heart has returned to the land the old trail ran through. So many years ago, old paths beckoned to me. I long to feel the warm desert sunshine on my face, on my hands, on my breast. The inner chamber of my heart is open wide, the pearls of memory just inside. I still stand listening for the sound of wheels that never come. Still waiting for the clasp of arms long crumbled into dust. But oh, how I long to travel that old trail as it once was. Just one more time. Thank you. And I want to leave you with this final thought. At the end of the day, the Santa Fe Trail is but a piece of real estate, colorful though it may be, taking you from point A to point B and hopefully your desired destination. But it is the human stories that, if told, bring it to life today, and if repeated, will keep the trail alive in the future. Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes.
You talked about the morning they stop. What time generally do they leave at sunrise or before?
Well, you know, they started hitching up at dawn and then loading up, and they moved out as shortly as they could. They didn't spend a long time on a breakfast or anything. Their main meal was at that stop.
Where are you from?
Hill City.
My mother was a member of the Santa Fe Trail Association.
I suppose you are too.
Yeah, yeah, and I've done a lot of stops along the trail because 2021 was their 200th anniversary, but they're extending it to 225 because there's some other commemorative events in those years. So they're trying to stretch out their 200th celebration a little bit longer. So, and I was on their entertainment committee, and so been traveling up and down the trail. So, and even taking us some other places into Oklahoma and Nebraska and spreading the good word on the Santa Fe Trail. There's songs, movies, everything about the Santa Fe Trail, so it has that allure to it. So, an interesting travel and history lesson. Thank you. I'll be around if you would like to visit.
Thank you, Marla. We just want to give you a little gift today.
Oh, well, thank you.
And then some cards. These were taken around Thomas County from different people. These are some of the award winners. And so,
Oh, great. Thank you very much.
thank you very much.
Can I write on Marla? I'm going to tell a couple things about her. If you go down to Fort Wallace, you will find Marla there often. She has played quite a role in getting Fort Wallace up and running and being very popular with us out here, which I think is long overdue because that's always one of my favorite spots. And when we go, and she's also a member of the Smoking Hill Trail Association, which I am too. And when we go to our conferences, this is how she dresses. So we go out on hot days, or when we've been on some Fort Wallace bus tours, and go on these hot days, and there's some gentlemen dressed in their regalia as well. But trust me, she's the most uncomfortable one there, and she's plucking along. You wouldn't get the trail just fine.
Yeah, somebody asked, and I usually do, but I don't know if this lady at Doña Tulis would have worn one, but usually I have to wear a corset too. But I really don't think, now, if you noticed on 1883, this gal, when she stripped down to cross the river, had on a really fancy corset. I'm hard pressed to believe that some of these women on the trail, I don't care how fashionable they wanted to be, were decked out in corsets. They had to be too flexible, and they had, they were riding horses and all sorts of stuff like that. So I'm hard pressed to believe they were in corsets. So I give myself a break sometimes with certain costumes, and I don't wear the corset. So.
And then last but not least, the reason she's wearing the feather in her hat is because she has played a role in an upcoming movie, and you may have read about it in this Northwest Kansas today. It's a magazine that comes out. You read about the filming of the movie Contested Planes, which tells the German family story, and Marla played a role in
Ruth Brown.
Ruth Brown was in the first section.
Ruth and Rufus Brown, and my husband Rufus was Buck Taylor from Gunsmoke.
And they did that filming in Wichita.
Yeah.
And then they did the second portion of the filming here at near south of Russell Springs, and then, or actually east of Russell Springs.
Yes.
And then they just finished the third portion of it near Pettis, Texas, just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And then they're hoping to have the completed film out
June 20th.
June 20th. So hopefully, because we're all interested in the story anyway, that you will recognize the face and see her there. So I wanted to report for her.
Yeah, I was with some other, my scenes were with Darby Hinton. He was Israel and did the Daniel Boone show. And Mary McDonough, there was Aaron in the Waltz. And then Buck. And so I was kind of a, stand-in. And, but anyway, it was still great fun. And it was a thrill when Mary would ask me questions about, now, should I do this? Should I say this? How would I, and, but they were all great people. And they used other stars down in Texas. They used Wyatt McCrae. He's the grandson of Joel McCrae. Do you remember the Western actor Joel McCrae? He's the grandson of Joel McCrae. And then R.W. Hampton, the Western entertainer. And they used Moses Briggs of Plenty. And if you've been watching Yellowstone, He's the Indian with the long braids, that's the driver for the district commissioner and runs the casino. That's Moses Brings a Plenty. And he actually lives in eastern Kansas. So they've tried to incorporate some named people in there with some of the rest of us. So, but it's great fun. It was great. It's a great experience, you know, too. And the movie sets are just like you've always heard. It's hurry up and wait. It's hurry up and wait.
And I forgot, she's an author.
Yes.
Yes, she's
And I was talking with Melanie here a little bit. The summer series is Ocean. My first book is called Custer's Mouse. So hopefully maybe you'll come back if I come back with my books. It's Custer's Mouse, and it's actually about a little mouse that General Custer had, although I've embellished it quite a bit. Then the second book is called A Dragon's Tale, and it's about the plesiosaur at Fort Wallace. It was discovered in 1867, 68 by the post surgeon. And it was technically a marine reptile, but it lived along with the dinosaurs during the Cretaceous period, but it was underwater. It was a waterborne. And so this is a telling of the discovery of the plesiosaur through a little boy's eyes by the name of Elliot Campbell. And he tells story. We're hoping, if I can get my crew up on it, because he said he'd do it for me, is there will be a link in the book and Michael Martin Murphy will read the book to you.
So stay tuned when it comes.
Yes.
It's at the publisher right now.
Well, it's on, yeah, it's at the layout now, yeah, and soon.
So, anyway, it'll come soon.
Hopefully, yes.
Sometime in the fall. Is that gonna be Wallace or Wallace?
No, there'll be a link in the book where you'll go to your phone or your computer and you'll bring it up and he'll read the book. I'm sure he'll be there again. He's great friends with Fort Wallace. So I'm sure he'll be back another time, but I don't know if they have anything currently planned.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. Hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you.